The message came at dawn. Not with sound or light or diplomacy, but with shadows that stretched across the sky, blotting out the morning sun. What should have been just another peaceful start to the day, coffee brewing in kitchens, children yawning their way into classrooms and commuters grumbling about traffic, was interrupted by the impossible. The sky cracked. Hundreds of ships, all alien, all silent, emerged from nowhere, orbiting Earth like vultures circling something already dead. Their designs weren't beautiful. They were cold, engineered, purposeful, like machines built to erase, not create. People stared up, phones shaking in their hands. Some cried. Some whispered prayers. Some just stood still as if not moving could somehow undo what they saw. Every country, every city, every screen lit up with the same footage. Dark vessels hanging in space, watching. At first there was hope. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they were just passing through. Maybe they wanted peace. After all, humanity had long dreamed of contact. Of not being alone. Of learning from others who reached for the stars. But dreams don't always survive first contact. Within hours, every satellite was shut down. Global communications stuttered and died. Navigation systems failed. The International Space Station went dark. The aliens didn't speak. Not through words. Not through symbols. Their message was silence. And silence, it turned out, was the loudest threat of all. The first wave wasn't a strike. It was a message. Cities lost power. Military bases turned to static. Our most advanced defenses, satellites, drones, countermeasures, were blinded in minutes. They were testing us. Measuring. Not afraid. Not rushed. They didn't consider us a threat. We weren't at war. Not yet. But everyone felt it. You could hear it in the way people whispered in bunkers. You could see it in the faces of soldiers and scientists working side by side for the first time in history. Something ancient had stirred in humanity, not fear, not surrender, but resolve. We were being targeted. And Earth doesn't kneel. Inside an old mountain facility buried beneath Colorado, what remained of the world's leadership gathered. It wasn't about nations anymore. Flags didn't matter. Borders didn't matter. Only survival did. At the center of it all stood Colonel Hart. A man whose eyes had seen too many endings and too few beginnings. He didn't care about politics or theories. He cared about lives. And right now the world was counting on him to make the next move. "They're not here to talk," he said quietly, voice tight with rage held in check. "They're here to assess. And when they're done assessing, they'll begin erasing." A silence followed. Not the quiet of fear, but of understanding. They all knew. Somewhere deep down they had known from the moment the ships arrived. These beings didn't travel across galaxies to shake hands. Humanity had always thought its biggest threat would be itself. But this was something different. And yet strangely familiar. A reminder that Earth had never been given anything. Every inch of freedom had been earned. Every right, every breath of peace fought for. So we gave them a message. Just one. A probe was launched. Crude by their standards. Simple. It carried no weapons, no threat. Just one file. Broadcast in every direction. No translation matrix. No attempt at diplomacy. Just a short video. Footage of Hiroshima. Of Auschwitz. Of the gulags. Of fire, of blood, of the terrible cost of trying to dominate this world. Then, footage of humans standing in the face of horror. Running into burning buildings. Shielding others with their bodies. Children being lifted from rubble. Soldiers carrying wounded enemies. Survivors walking through ash, heads held high. Then, finally, a voice. "Human. Steady. You're not the first to aim at Earth. You won't be the last. But listen carefully, this is your only warning. Leave now. Or learn what it means when humans decide to fight back." That was it. No threats. No bargaining. Just a chance. One chance. The ships didn't move. Days passed. Humanity held its breath. People slept in basements and stations. Some never slept at all. Others trained. Not just soldiers but civilians. Old men who remembered war. Young women who had only known peace. All willing to do what it took. And yet, the silence from orbit remained unbroken. Until one night, a single ship detached from the fleet. Unlike the others, it drifted slowly. Almost aimlessly. And then, it entered the atmosphere. No weapons fired. No retaliation followed. Instead, the ship fell. Cameras from across the globe caught it, the vessel tumbling, burning, crashing into the Nevada desert. Emergency crews were blocked. Military teams rushed in. The site was locked down in minutes. But the damage was already done. Something had survived the crash. Not a weapon. Not a scout. A warning of their own. Inside the ship, embedded into the walls like nervous systems, were the remains of something. Not human. Not machine. And not alive. Slumped in what must have been a command station was a creature with glassy skin and too many joints, its head slumped forward like a marionette with its strings cut. Except it hadn't died from the crash. It had died from fear. Every bone in its body was shattered, from the inside. Organs ruptured. Neural system fried. No visible wounds. The scientists examining it could only guess. But the soldiers nearby felt it in their guts. Something had happened inside that ship. Something it saw or felt had killed it before the fire ever touched the hull. And etched into one wall, in perfect symmetry, was a symbol none of our linguists could decipher. But a child watching the feed on the dark web did. Because he had drawn the same thing 2 days earlier in his notebook. When asked why, the boy shrugged. Said he saw it in a dream. Except, he wasn't the only one. Across the world, others had dreamed the same thing. Farmers in rural China. Students in Brazil. A blind veteran in Kenya. All describing the same symbol. The same feeling. Something was reaching out. But it wasn't alien. It was something older. Deeper. Buried inside us. The crash hadn't just killed one of their own. It had triggered something. Something they didn't expect. Something they didn't understand. And for the first time the fleet began to move, not toward Earth but away from it. Not all of them. Just a few. The rest stayed. Watched. And waited. Colonel Hart stood before the map of their positions. A sea of red dots staring down at Earth. No longer scouts. No longer silent. Then one of them blinked out. Not from retreat. From destruction. No missile launched. No laser fired. Just, gone. He turned to his team. We didn't do that. Eyes widened. No one spoke. A second dot blinked out. Then a third. Not retreating. Vanishing. Panic wasn't in Hart's nature. But even he felt it rising in his throat. What the hell is happening up there? A new signal came through. Not from orbit. From beneath the Pacific. Coordinates. Pulsing. And a word barely translated. Awakened. That's when the earthquake started. Tidal patterns shifted. Birds fled in flocks so dense they darkened the skies. Deep-sea sensors picked up movements so massive, entire tectonic plates rumbled. Something was stirring below us. And it wasn't alien. Hart stared at the trembling feed, fists clenched. They came to conquer Earth, he muttered. But something else heard them. Behind him, a young officer asked, barely above a whisper, "What do we do?" Hart didn't answer right away. He looked at the monitor again. Where one word had appeared, now came two more. We remember. That's where the feed cut out. No explanation. No sound. Just darkness. And in that moment, across every continent, humans felt something primal rising. Not fear. Not anger. But the instinct that had carried them through every fire, every flood, every extinction. Defiance. And something else. We are not alone. But maybe, not in the way we thought. The signal didn't return. All screens that once showed the pulsing words, *we remember*, went blank. Not off. Just still. As if waiting. As if whatever had sent the message was now listening. Colonel Hart stood frozen, his thoughts racing. The command room buzzed with voices, radios, live feeds, translations, and questions no one could answer. But deep inside, Hart felt something old and uncomfortable stirring in his chest. A feeling he hadn't known since his first deployment. Helplessness. "Pull up the Pacific seismographs again," he said finally, his voice sharper now. The young officer beside him nodded, tapping keys with a shaky hand. A wall of graphs appeared on the screen. Readings from sensors stretching across the ocean floor, Japan to California, Australia to Alaska. And every single one of them was still trembling. It hadn't stopped. Some deep part of the earth was still shifting. Not randomly. Not like an earthquake. This movement had rhythm. A beat. Slow and steady like something breathing. Or waking. A scientist in a gray lab coat, face drawn from exhaustion, stepped closer. "Sir, we don't think this is a tectonic event. Not a natural one." Hart's jaw tightened. "Define not natural." The scientist hesitated. "There's a pattern in the vibrations. A signal embedded in the tremors. It's not language exactly, but structured. Intentional." "You mean it's communicating?" She nodded. "Or responding." That word hit everyone differently. Responding, as if Earth itself, or something beneath it, had heard what came from the stars. A murmur spread through the room. Some dismissed it, holding tight to logic. Others weren't so sure. And then there were the few, like Hart, who had seen too much to dismiss anything anymore. "We need eyes in the water," he said. "Launch every sub we've got. I want visuals, deep trench zones, volcanic vents, cold water zones. Now." "But sir," someone said, "if this thing is as big as it seems sending man subs could be, we don't have the luxury of safety," Hart cut in. "We need to know what we're dealing with." Orders flew. Teams mobilized. Satellites were reoriented. Deep-sea drones were activated. The world, for a moment, was united by a single question. What did we awaken? Meanwhile, far from the mountain base, life on the surface stumbled on, fragile and uncertain. In a dimly lit apartment in the heart of Paris, a schoolteacher named Elias sat by the window, staring at the starless sky. He had never cared much for politics, never believed in war stories or conspiracy theories. But now, his students had stopped asking about homework and started asking if they'd still be alive next week. He didn't have an answer. The news played softly in the background. Reports of strange animal behavior, whales breaching in unusual patterns, birds circling the same cities for hours, dogs barking at empty corners. Power grids blinking. Radio signals echoing voices from decades past. As if the world was being pulled back through time. Or reality was thinning around the edges. Elias turned off the TV. He didn't want to hear more. Not tonight. He reached for a notebook, flipping past pages of old lesson plans. Near the back was a new section. One filled with symbols. He didn't know why he drew them. They came to him in flashes, in dreams he couldn't remember after waking. One symbol repeated more than the others. A spiral broken in the middle. He traced it with his fingertip, not realizing his hands were shaking. Halfway across the world, in a coastal village in the Philippines, an old woman named Marisol stood barefoot on the beach. The ocean had always spoken to her. Not in words, but in motion, in air, in the way the waves carried emotion. She felt it now, something rising. Not evil. Not good. Just massive. Something the sea had forgotten it carried. Children played in the sand behind her, unaware. Their laughter rang out like small sparks in the wind. But Marisol's eyes stayed locked on the horizon. Not for ships. Not for storms. But for answers. Because last night in her sleep she heard a voice. Not human. Not alien. Something that echoed through water and stone and dream. And it had said, "You are not the first." Back at the command facility the first drone feed came in. The Pacific was wide and black, endless in all directions. The drone dipped lower, deeper. Its lights cut through silt and shadow. Fish scattered. A whale passed by too fast as if fleeing something. And then, suddenly, nothing. A wall. Not stone. Not metal. Something else. The feed stuttered. Then stopped. No explosion. No impact. Just, gone. They launched another. Same result. By the fourth, a clearer image came through for just a second. A shape. Not mechanical. Not natural. And far too large. "Enhance that frame," someone said. The technician zoomed in, adjusted light levels. The shape was layered. Like a city buried under centuries. A structure not built but grown. Half organic, half mineral. It stretched into the darkness like roots in the deep. And on its surface, more of those symbols. The same spiral. It wasn't a ship. It was part of the earth. Was this always there? Hart asked, voice quiet now. "We don't think so," said the scientist. "At least not in this form. It's like something old, reactivating." "Ancient tech?" asked another. The scientist shook her head. "More like a memory. Something left behind." A memory. That word stirred something in Hart's chest. A story his grandfather used to tell. Something about fire coming from the sky. About how the old tribes used to say Earth wasn't just home, it was alive. That it chose who thrived and who didn't. Back then it was just a bedtime tale. Now it didn't feel like one. Across the room a linguist cried out, pointing to the latest transmission. The symbol on the submerged structure had changed. Now it pulsed. Not randomly. In time with the vibrations. As if syncing with something. "Colonel," the tech whispered, "I think it's trying to communicate again. Put it on the main screen." A new message appeared. Simple. Terrifying. "You have been seen." And then, beneath it, another line. "Choose who speaks for you." Hart stared at the screen. The room was quiet now. "Who speaks for us?" someone repeated. It wasn't a political question. Not anymore. Because whatever was watching, whatever had risen beneath the ocean, it didn't want to talk to governments or armies. It wanted to speak to humanity. To the soul of humanity. But who could possibly carry that weight? Hours passed. The world argued. Names were suggested, rejected. Theologians, scientists, artists, survivors, people who had lived through humanity's darkest hours. And finally, a name stuck. Not because he was famous, not because he was powerful, but because weeks ago, before the sky filled with ships, before the world changed, a man named Elias, just a teacher, had drawn the same symbols in his notebook before anyone else. They found him in his apartment, still awake, still drawing. When they showed him the symbols on the screen, he didn't flinch. "I've seen these since I was a child," he whispered. "Can you talk to them?" Hart asked. "I don't know if I talk," Elias said slowly. "But I think I hear, and they want someone who listens." And so he was brought to the base. Not under guard but with care. As if he was carrying something fragile. Or sacred. They didn't give him a script. There was nothing to prepare for. Elias stood before the console. The symbols pulsed. He placed his hand on the screen. And instantly he was gone. Not in body. But his mind. His voice. His being. Eyes rolled back. Skin flushed. His lips moved but no sound came out. And then, the symbols on the screen began to shift, one by one, until a new message appeared. "We see your echo." And another. "But others still watch." That's when the alarm sounded. Not from Earth. From space. The orbital fleet had begun to descend. Not in full force. Just a spearhead. A dozen ships breaking formation headed straight for the Pacific. Straight for whatever was down there. Humanity had given its warning. Now the galaxy was answering. Colonel Hart's voice was steel. "Scramble everything. Get our fighters in the air. Lock every missile system we've got." "But sir," someone said, "if we fire on them?" "They're coming here," Hart snapped. "We don't fire to provoke. We fire to protect." And still Elias stood frozen, his hand on the screen. Unmoving. Lost in something no one else could see. And far beneath the ocean's surface, the ancient structure pulsed brighter than ever. Not with fear. With anticipation. As if waiting for a reason. Just one. To awaken fully. And Earth would never be the same again. The sky was on fire. Not with flames but with light, metallic and cruel, pouring down from the alien ships as they broke into the atmosphere. Dozens of them, glowing like falling suns, their hulls tearing through cloud and wind with no resistance. People everywhere looked up, breath held, hearts frozen. No one knew if this was the beginning of a war or the end of everything. At the command base, every screen flickered between satellite feeds, radar scans, and scrambled comms. The entire western coastline of the Pacific lit up with alerts. Fighter squadrons launching, naval fleets scrambling into formation, missile systems humming to life, waiting for the command. Colonel Hart's voice cut through the noise. "Hold the line. Do not engage unless fired upon. We don't start this. But we damn sure finish it if we have to." But no one was calm. The descending ships weren't just fast, they were precise. Calculated. They weren't aiming at cities or military bases. They were coming down in a straight line toward the ocean trench where the ancient structure lay buried beneath the waves. The same structure that had pulsed with impossible energy only hours earlier. The same structure that had whispered to humanity through dreams, vibrations, and symbols, warning them, perhaps, or preparing them. And now it seemed the aliens wanted to silence it. Elias still stood in front of the screen, one hand resting against the glass, eyes vacant. He hadn't spoken since he touched the console. But now something shifted. His lips moved again. This time the words came. "They're afraid." The room fell silent. Elias didn't speak loudly. In fact, his voice was quiet, tired. But everyone listened. Something in the way he said it cut through every doubt. "They don't understand what's down there," he continued. "They didn't come to fight us. They came to bury it." Colonel Hart stepped closer. "Bury what, Elias?" But Elias didn't answer. Instead, he trembled, his body pulling tight as if he was hearing something too vast, too heavy for his mind to hold. "The deep remembers," he whispered. "And now, it's waking up." From the Pacific, a new tremor hit. This one wasn't slow or rhythmic. It was sudden and violent. A wave rose, not just from weather or tide, but from something pushing upward. Submarines stationed nearby were the first to see it. A crack in the ocean floor. Massive. Ancient. Glowing with a light that pulsed like a living thing. It stretched outward like veins underwater, spreading in all directions. And then, something emerged. Not a creature. Not a ship. A formation. Spiked. Towering. Made of layered stone and crystal, taller than any building ever constructed, rising from the trench like a memory refusing to stay buried. And at its peak, more symbols. Shifting, reshaping, responding to something unseen. The alien ships didn't hesitate. They opened fire. Blinding beams of light lanced toward the structure, piercing clouds, boiling the ocean around it. The water churned violently. Explosions erupted across the sea's surface. And yet the structure stood, untouched. Not because of shields. Because something caught the attacks before they landed. Something invisible. High above the battlefield, pilots watching from fighter jets saw it first. A shimmer in the sky. Then another. As if the air itself was cracking. And then, wings. Massive wings, made of energy and vapor and light, unfolded from nothing. Dozens of them. Some small, darting. Others wide as cities. They weren't ships. They weren't drones. They were forms. Not entirely physical. Not entirely spirit. And they were ours. The alien fleet hesitated. It was the first time since their arrival that they moved out of formation, just a slight shift. Like even they didn't know what they were looking at. In the command room someone whispered, "What are those things?" Elias's voice came again, low, trembling. "They were here before us. Long before. Guardians maybe. Or warnings. We buried them in stories. We forgot. But the Earth didn't." The room shuddered again. This time the power flickered. The ocean wasn't just reacting. It was changing. From beneath the waves, spires of stone and metal shot upward, rising into the air, forming strange archways and shapes no human architect would ever imagine. Some twisted. Others hovered. All of them pointed at the sky. At the invaders. Colonel Hart grabbed the radio. "All units, prepare for possible engagement. Repeat, prepare for defensive action." But deep down he knew this wasn't just about military strategy anymore. Something bigger was happening. Something the human race had no control over. Still they wouldn't run. On the coast of Japan, thousands stood on rooftops watching the lights in the sky. In Brazil, children sat on their mothers' shoulders, eyes wide. In the Canadian forests, people stood in silence, breath fogging in the cold night air. They weren't hiding anymore. They were watching. And somewhere in that collective gaze something powerful stirred. Not hatred. Not vengeance. But remembrance. As if humanity itself, every memory, every sacrifice, every step through fire and storm, was being called to the surface. Because Earth wasn't just defending itself with machines or old myths. It was reaching back into its deepest roots. And those roots were human. Elias suddenly gasped and fell to his knees. Hart rushed to him. "Elias, talk to me, what's happening?" Elias clutched his chest. His voice was hoarse now, barely holding on. "They're trying to suppress it. They think if they destroy the structure they silence the voice. They don't understand they're not just fighting us. They're fighting the conscience of the planet." More alien ships descended. The sky turned red with their fury. One of the shimmering figures in the air broke formation and streaked toward a ship, so fast it looked like a bolt of lightning. The impact wasn't physical, but the result was real. The ship blinked out of the sky. Not destroyed. Just removed. No one saw where it went. The alien fleet responded immediately. More fire. More formations. The atmosphere lit up with war. But the Earth didn't sit still. The structure beneath the sea pulsed again, sending another wave through the ocean and up into the sky. Every person on the planet felt it. Not pain. Not power. But a choice. Something old, and silent, was asking for something. A decision. A signal. Hart stared at the screens, at the chaos unfolding. At Elias trembling and pale. And then, everything stopped. Not literally. But time slowed. A breath held across the world. In that pause, a new light appeared, brighter than anything before. It didn't come from the sky. It came from the Earth itself. From deserts and forests. From mountains and ruins. From cities and caves. The light rose slowly like steam from ancient cracks, until it merged in the sky into a shape, undefined, shifting. It was us. Humanity's pain. Humanity's rage. Humanity's hope. The alien fleet halted. And the structure beneath the ocean opened, just a sliver. Just enough for something to rise from it. Not a weapon. Not a beast. A figure. Too tall. Too old. Made of stone and memory and sky. It didn't move fast. But every alien ship adjusted trajectory when it rose. Because they felt it. And maybe for the first time so did we. Not fear. But the realization. That Earth had a will. And it was awake. Elias opened his eyes. His voice cracked. It's time. And then, everything turned white. The white light didn't fade. It held, pulsing like a heartbeat, stretching across the sky and the sea in every corner of the earth. People shielded their eyes, but it didn't burn. It wasn't heat. It was something else, something deeper. A presence pressing against every human soul, not to harm but to remember. Then without warning the light cracked. A sound followed, low and vast, like the earth itself groaning under the weight of its own memory. Lightning forked across the sky. The alien fleet recoiled, formations twisting as their systems reacted wildly to something they couldn't predict. One of their lead ships lost control and spiraled into the upper atmosphere, breaking apart before it could recover. But it wasn't the light that caused it. It was what came through the light. Not another Earthborn protector. Not another defense rising from the depths. A signal. Sure. Fast. Alien, but not from the ships already orbiting Earth. It came from beyond. From outside the solar system. Far outside. Deep space listening posts that had gone silent days ago suddenly surged back to life, flooding with data. Every long-range telescope lit up with readings. A new fleet, 20 times the size of the one already in Earth's orbit, was en route. Not weeks away. Minutes. Colonel Hart stared at the live feed, his face tightening as he read the trajectory. The alien ships currently attacking weren't the invasion force. They were the vanguard. Scouts. Disruptors. Sent to trigger a reaction from Earth. And now the real armada was coming not just for conquest but for suppression. Because they hadn't just seen Earth's defenses. They'd felt the awakening. And that terrified them. Elias sat against the wall now, breathing in shallow gasps, the skin beneath his eyes darkening. He looked more like a shadow than a man, but his voice, though thin, was steady. They didn't come to take the planet. They came to erase the memory of it. Hart turned sharply. Memory? They want to wipe out the evidence, Elias said. Not just of humanity but of whatever was here before. Whatever spoke through the earth. Whatever remembered the last war. Hart's voice dropped. You're saying this has happened before? Elias nodded. Long before us. They silenced other worlds. They erased civilizations not just by destroying life, but by destroying what life had become, and now they've come to finish what they started here. Hart didn't speak. His mind raced. They hadn't just triggered an earthbound defense. They'd reawakened a scar in the galaxy. A long-forgotten rebellion. One Earth had inherited without knowing. Outside the air crackled. More ships broke into the atmosphere. This time not just from above, but from below. The ocean opened again, not gently. Not with calm pulses of light, but with violent tears. Water rushed upward as something massive rose from the trench. Not built, not born, but remembered. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was a remnant. A colossal figure made of black stone and glowing fractures, as if its own bones carried the heat of dying stars. Its face was masked in shadow, and its chest bore the same spiral symbol Elias had drawn, now fractured by a deep glowing crack. It stood motionless at first, half submerged in the sea. Then it looked up, and the alien fleet paused, just for a breath. And then the new armada entered the solar system. Every telescope blinked red. Every satellite feed crackled with static. The skies dimmed, not from night but from sheer scale. Thousands of vessels, sharp, dark, with wings like knives, poured toward Earth in coordinated silence. Global panic surged. People who had once watched from rooftops now fled underground. Governments scrambled to reroute evacuations. The skies, already a war zone, now became a battlefield unlike anything in human history. Galaxy war had begun. And Earth was no longer just defending itself. It had become the last memory of something ancient. A beacon that couldn't be allowed to survive. Not in their eyes. But even in the face of this storm, the world did not kneel. Colonel Hart walked to the center of the command room. Patch me through to every open frequency. Military. Civilian. Doesn't matter. A technician nodded. You're live, now. Hart took a breath. This is Colonel Jonathan Hart. To everyone listening, on Earth, on ships, in bunkers, in the sky, we are not alone. And we are not just fighting for survival anymore. We are fighting for truth. He paused. The screens above him showed the approaching fleet, blacking out stars. They want to erase us because we remember. Because this planet remembers. We carry the pain of our past but also the strength of it. We've rebuilt after every fire. We've bled for each other. We've suffered, yes, but we've endured, and now they're afraid of what we might become. He looked into the camera, his voice raw. So we give them no choice. We don't run. We stand, together. As one species. As one home. They think they're bringing the end. A long pause. Let's show them it's only the beginning. The feed cut. Fighters scrambled. Missiles launched. Satellites redirected. And from the ruins of long-dead civilizations hidden deep in Earth's crust, more symbols began to glow. Some in forests. Some beneath deserts. Some buried in ice. And all of them pulsing the same message. We are still here. Elias looked up, tears in his eyes. Do you feel it? He whispered. Hart nodded. He felt it too. Humanity wasn't just responding to the invasion. It was awakening something buried not in the Earth, but in themselves. And the galaxy would soon learn. This was no longer just about Earth. This was about everything they tried to forget. And they had just reminded us. The sky shattered. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't even visible at first. But everyone on Earth felt it. In their bones. In their blood. Like a crack had split the fabric of space itself, and something old had finally broken through. The alien armada moved in silence, filling the upper atmosphere. Tens of thousands of ships, perfect in formation, too many to count. Their hulls shimmered like glass stretched over metal, their weapons humming with cold purpose. From orbit they looked like a wall, endless, absolute. And then they opened fire. Beams of light carved down through the clouds, targeting the emerging structures beneath the sea, striking the colossal figure that had risen from the trench. Explosions boiled the water, clouds burst into vapor. The impact was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. But the figure stood. It didn't retaliate. It didn't move. It simply endured. Every blast, every hit, every weapon the fleet unleashed, it took them all. And then it lifted its head. Just slightly. And the world changed. All across the planet, the glowing symbols etched into ruins, mountains, oceans, they lit up at once. Ancient carvings that no one had ever translated began to pulse, alive with power. People felt the vibrations in their chests, saw the patterns reflected in their eyes. A message echoed, not through speakers or radios but through the air itself. Remember us. From within the light, something began to rise. Not ships. Memories. Images flashed across the sky like streaks of lightning, visions of cities made of crystal and wind, long-extinct civilizations kneeling together under twin suns, alien races who once stood shoulder to shoulder against something greater than all of them. And then visions of destruction. Flames. Ruins. The same invaders. The same ships. It had happened before. And Earth was the last echo of that forgotten alliance. Colonel Hart stared at the feed, jaw clenched. This isn't a war, he said quietly. It's a cover-up. They've been wiping out every world that remembers. Elias, barely conscious now, opened his eyes. Then don't let them forget. Hart turned to his team. Fire everything. Not at the ships. At the symbols. The room froze. But sir, we don't know what that will. Do it, Hart ordered. They're not weapons. They're keys. All across the world missile codes were entered. Lasers activated. Particle beams aligned. And for the first time in human history, every defense system on the planet aimed not at an enemy, but at the Earth itself. They fired. The ground shook. But the symbols didn't break. They absorbed the energy. Shifted. And what came next was not fire. It was light. It burst from every point on the planet's surface. Upward, outward, a web of golden energy connecting oceans to mountains, continents to sky. The entire planet lit up like a star. And from within the light, voices. Not words. Not language. But a feeling that echoed in every soul. You are not alone. Above, the alien fleet began to falter. Systems glitched. Formations broke. One by one, ships began to fall, not destroyed but disabled, like something was turning their minds inward, forcing them to remember things long buried. A final warning pulsed from the structure in the Pacific. Stand down. The invaders didn't listen. They sent one final wave, thousands of missiles, all aimed at Earth's core. Too many to stop. Too fast. And then, everything stopped. Midair. Time froze. Missiles hung above the clouds like statues in the wind. And then, reversed. One by one the weapons turned, not toward Earth but toward the fleet above. No one gave the order. Earth decided. The missiles flew. In seconds half the fleet was gone. The rest scattered. Not from fear. From recognition. They had seen something in Earth they never expected. Forgiveness. Not mercy. Forgiveness, for being afraid. They retreated. Not in panic but in silence. The battle was over. Elias collapsed. Colonel Hart caught him, held him close. You did it, Hart whispered. Elias smiled faintly, tears in his eyes. I just listened. For days the world stood still. No more attacks. No more signals. Just silence. And then, as people began to return to the surface, something strange happened. The symbols faded. Not erased. Just quiet. Like they'd done their part. But before the last one disappeared, a final pulse echoed through the earth. We are safe. For now. Asterisk asterisk. It should have ended there. But one last signal came. Not from orbit. From within Earth. A new point deep beneath the Arctic Circle lit up on global scans. No one had touched it. No one had ever known it was there. But it was opening. And what lay inside was not from Earth. Colonel Hart stood alone in the control room when the alert came in. He stared at the blinking dot on the screen. A second structure. But older. Buried deeper than anything else found. He closed his eyes. The war was over. But something else had just begun. Colonel Hart sat in silence. The room around him buzzed with quiet voices and the hum of equipment, but it all faded into the background. His eyes stayed locked on the single blinking point on the screen, the one that had appeared after the final wave of the galaxy war. It pulsed slowly beneath the Arctic, buried deeper than anything they had ever found. The Pacific structure had risen on its own, revealed in defiance, a memory awakened. But this one hadn't risen. It had waited. Quiet. Watching. For a while no one dared to speak about it. The world was still recovering. People were emerging from bunkers, cities were assessing damage, families reunited in tearful embraces. What had started as fear turned into something else entirely, a strange, overwhelming gratitude. Not just for survival, but for the truth. The truth that Earth wasn't just another planet in the galaxy. It had been a part of something much larger. And forgotten. Until now. Hart finally stood, walking past the large display screen toward the window of the command center. It looked out across the mountain range. Snow was falling again. Light. Gentle. Normal. He hadn't seen snowfall in weeks, not since the first shadows crossed the sky. Now the world looked soft again, quiet. But underneath it all, he knew the silence had changed. Elias had been taken to the medical wing 2 days earlier. He hadn't woken since. Whatever connection he had formed with the Earth, or with the ancient memory inside it, had left him exhausted, drained, but alive. The doctors didn't know what to do for him. They ran tests, monitored his vitals. All they could say was that his brain activity didn't follow any known pattern. It was layered, firing in strange rhythms, sometimes in perfect sync with seismic pulses from beneath the Arctic. Hart visited him every morning. He'd sit by the bedside, say nothing and listen, just in case Elias spoke again. But he didn't. Not until the 5th morning. Hart was halfway through a cup of cold coffee when Elias moved. Just a twitch at first. Then his eyes fluttered open. Hart stood quickly. Elias. The man's gaze was unfocused at first, like he was trying to find his way back to something he'd left behind. I heard it again, Elias said, his voice dry and thin. It's not over. Hart pulled his chair closer. Tell me. Elias blinked slowly, then looked toward the ceiling. The Arctic. It's not a weapon. It's a vault. Hart frowned. A vault? Elias nodded. Everything they couldn't destroy. They buried it. What we saw in the Pacific was just one voice. There are more. Others who fought. Others who refused to be forgotten. Hart leaned forward. Why is it opening now? Because we're ready to remember. The words sent a chill through Hart's spine. They echoed something he hadn't wanted to admit since the beginning of the invasion, that Earth was chosen. Not just attacked. Chosen. Because humanity had something the others didn't. Something the invaders feared. Memory. Grit. Defiance. The next day a convoy moved north. Not military. Scientists. Linguists. A few spiritual leaders. Hart didn't trust politicians with this. What waited in the Arctic wasn't about power or territory. It was about truth. Elias asked to go. Despite his condition. Hart agreed on one condition, that he stay monitored at all times. The journey north was long and quiet. No one spoke much. The snow deepened the further they traveled. Roads turned to trails and eventually trails disappeared altogether. They flew the last stretch by VTOL craft, landing on a stretch of ice that had begun to crack in a perfect circle, just as the structure beneath began to shift. Drones were sent down first. What they found was astonishing. Beneath the surface was a massive dome of obsidian stone, untouched by time or erosion. No carvings. No symbols. Just a single doorway hidden under 2 kilometers of ice. It had opened on its own. Inside, the air was still, dry, clean, like it had been preserved in a bubble since before history began. The team moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything. They documented, scanned, recorded. And then they found the chambers. Dozens of them. Each one held fragments, art, scripts, bones, even music stored on crystal memory slabs. But the most haunting were the messages. Some recorded in audio, some visual, others embedded in light. None of them came from Earth. Not a single one. They were from other worlds, other peoples, other resistances. A whole chorus of civilizations that had once stood against the same force that had come for Earth. Some lost. Some erased. But some had survived long enough to leave their last words here. The vault wasn't a weapon. It was a testament. Proof that the galaxy had fought back once before. Proof that Earth wasn't the only world that refused to surrender. And now it was the last one standing. As they studied the messages, the pattern became clear. Each civilization had gone through the same sequence. Arrival, silence, invasion, resistance, and then erasure. But Earth had broken that pattern. Not because of weapons. Because of memory. Because of human defiance to be forgotten. The invaders hadn't expected that. They had believed Earth would fall in silence like the others. But it hadn't. Humanity had stood. Scarred but unbroken. And now the truth was clear. The war wasn't just about Earth. It was about control over history. The power to decide what is remembered and what is lost. Hart stood in the central chamber of the vault, surrounded by the echo of extinct voices, and realized the final truth. The invaders weren't afraid of humans. They were afraid of what humans would do once they knew the truth. Because knowledge lives. And Earth had just become the loudest voice in the galaxy. The final report was released slowly, carefully. Much of it was withheld from the public, but the core truth was shared. Earth had survived the largest recorded invasion attempt in history. The attackers had retreated. And something had been discovered beneath the Arctic. People responded in waves. Some with fear. Others with wonder. But most with pride. Humanity had stood together. In a way it hadn't in generations. Borders didn't matter when the sky turned black. Differences faded when the world was on the edge. And that unity, that fragile, raw human fire, it had changed something. In the months that followed, Earth changed. Nations opened up their space programs to global collaboration. A new task force was formed, not for war but for memory. To preserve what they found. To honor what had been lost. And to prepare for whatever came next. Colonel Hart was asked to lead the new initiative. He declined. Instead, he passed it on to someone else. Elias. He had recovered. Not fully. He still had days where the voices got too loud. But he had a calm now. A steadiness. Like someone who had been given a glimpse of the full picture. He accepted the role with quiet humility. I'm not leading anyone, he said. I'm just listening. In one of the last interviews he ever gave, Elias was asked what the most important lesson was from everything they'd discovered. He paused a long time before answering. Empires fall. Machines rust. But stories stay. He looked at the camera. Remember that. Remember each other. Because as long as we remember, we are not lost. And we are never alone. Years passed. Then decades. No new invasions came. No new signals. But humanity didn't wait in fear. They launched new missions into deep space. Not to conquer. Not to control. But to understand. To find the other vaults. The lost voices. To honor the ones who had been silenced. And Earth became something new. Not just a home. A beacon. The galaxy war had left scars. But it had also lit a fire. A reminder that even in the darkest silence, a single voice, clear, defiant, human, could echo across the stars. And sometimes, that's all it takes.